Hello everyone. Today we are going to learn how to configure inbound and outbound calling on Inform Voice. Let's start with inbound calling. We are going to use DID mapping lists. DID mapping lists are simple tables. In one column we're going to have the DID numbers. In the other column we're going to have destinations inside Inform Voice. Those destinations can be of different types, as we will see just in a bit. Let's define those mapping lists. We will open our IFV administrator, expand our general tab settings, locate an item called mapping list, expand it, and we will find the DID mapping entries. We right click and we can add a DID mapping list. In our case, we have two trunks, one in the Chicago location and the other one in the Orlando location. So at this point, we can choose what do we want to do in terms of how many mapping lists we want to have. So we can have separate mapping list or a common mapping list. In my case, I decided to use a separate mapping list. So I will name it Chicago. Let's add some entries to that mapping list to show you how it works. In the first column, we will have an address type. We can choose what type within Inform Voice the destination is going to be. We can select extension if the destination is an extension number. We can choose media server address if the destination is, for example, a auto attendant flow. We can choose tie line, for example, if the destination is actually another PBX connected to Inform Voice through a tie line connection, which is also a kind of SIP trunk. Or if we don't know the exact type, but we know that the number exists, we can choose just number. And Inform Voice will not do any checking. It will just try to call that number. I prefer to be more specific, but that's a choice. I will use extension and I will show you a rule that we can use to cover all the extensions of the Chicago area. So for example, if the number is 847-555-1XXX, I can put the ranges this way. So we know that all the extension numbers in the Chicago office start with 1. So I can create a rule that takes the last 4 digits of that DID number, and that becomes the extension number to call. In order to define a rule, we click on this button, Define Rule, and we can do different things. We can prepend, append, fix numbers. We can choose whatever we want from the ID number itself. In our case, we will be simple. We will use the last 4 digits. We can test the caller ID mapping right here. And I click test, I will see, I will call the extension 1234 because I applied this rule. Let's make another rule just to give you a better idea. I will choose media server address in this case, and I will enter the main number for the Chicago office, and I will route this number to the auto attendant of that office. This is why I chose media server address. So this way, people calling the main number of the Chicago office will reach the auto attendant of that office. We can keep adding different numbers as we need to. Okay, we have the mapping table here. We need to assign it to the trunk. So we can go to the trunk tab. We locate our Chicago trunk, which is this one. And we can go to the inward routing tab and just add the DID mapping list. I can also test the DID mapping entry here. There is a second option here, which is default routing. So if the DID number doesn't match any of the numbers in the DID mapping table, it can route the call to a specific destination through default routing. The beauty about using default routing is that you can add a sort of schedule. We can start on one specific date, a specific time, and for example, we select this extension, and then we can add another entry, and let's say at 5 p.m. we choose a different extension to call. And we can create a schedule for all the weekdays and weekends. So this would be an alternative to the DID mapping. I can even have a real general default routing that doesn't even depend on the trunk, applies to any trunk. So that's a choice and depends pretty much on the environment what you can choose and why. So let's add a DID mapping table to our Orlando trunk. But in this case, we will do it differently. We will go straight to the trunk. We will go to the inward routing tab. We will try to add the mapping list, but we don't find the mapping list we want. So we just create a new one from here using the new button. You will see that with Inform Voice there are several ways to reach the same dialog box to make a specific assignment. That's very, very common in Inform Voice. So here we will do and add an Orlando mapping list, and we will do something similar that as we did with Chicago. We will select the range 2XXX, and we are going to create a rule for the last 4 digits. And we will also create a rule for the main number of the Orlando office, and we will route it to a different auto attendant that will be specific to Orlando. So now I created the mapping list, but still not applied. So I need to click to apply it and click OK. And now it is applied. So as you see, we covered the different options to route calls into Inform Voice. Let's talk a little bit about outbound calling. Outbound calling starts with an access code for an outbound service. We will find it in the numbering plan. We decided to use 8 as our outbound calling access code simply because we want to avoid the 9 to reduce the chance for an accidental 911 call. As you can see, this outside service setting is set to trunk group, but it doesn't have any trunk here. When the access code doesn't have any trunk, the system looks for the telephony area that the station belongs to, and it looks for a specific outbound service defined in that telephony area. So we can go to the telephony area, we can choose Chicago, for example, And we will see that the default telephony area for Chicago is 7100. So now the system will look back to the numbering plan and find 7100. And under 7100, it will find trunks. And it will start using the trunks considering the priority. Highest number is the highest priority. This is basically the flow for an outbound call. Now we have to decide what type of caller ID we want to output on those outbound calls. And there are different ways to set it up. The first one is what we call DID caller ID. The system does a reverse lookup in the DID mapping list and finds the DID number that matches the extension number that's making the outbound call. And that's the outbound caller ID for that call. In order to select that option, we specify it under the class of service of the station. So if we go back to the General tab here, we locate the class of services and we take a look at one class of service, let's say manager class of service. You will see there is an item called DID caller ID, which is selected, which means that all the stations that have manager class of service will use DID caller ID for outbound caller ID. So we can turn it on or turn it off for specific class of services, and this way we can control what kind of caller ID do we output. If the ID caller ID is not selected, the system will use a fixed caller ID, which will depend on a system variable. We will see it here in a second. And the options are the following. We can use the number in the telephony area, so this PBX number written here. And we can use it two ways. We can use the number in the telephony area of the trunk making the call, or the number in the telephony area of the station making a call. I can also select a specific outbound caller ID per zone, which can be different than the one for the telephony area. So in this case, it will be the station who controls the zone where the caller ID will be out. So how do we select which option do we want? In case the DID caller ID checkbox is not selected in the class of service, well, we go to System Properties. We can double click. We go to System Initialization Settings. We add an option here, and our option will be outbound caller ID. By default, if the ID caller ID is not selected, it's going to be the trunk telephony area. But we have different options. We can use the station telephony area, and we can use the station zone. It's our choice. So I will keep the station zone in this example, for example. So now we can control what outbound caller ID we want to send for a specific call from a specific station. Finally, let's talk a little bit about toll restriction. How can we control what kind of calls do specific users make or not? This control is done through the class of service of the specific stations. Let's take one class of service, for example, the employee class of. You will see there is an area here called permission list, which is empty. That means that calls are basically unrestricted at this point. And let's, for example, decide that the employees cannot make international calls. So we will add a restriction for international calls to this class of service. So this is the way we're going to do it. We're going to add here. We are going to select which kind of address type. In this case, we are interested in outside calls. We can also restrict inside calls in a way. And we will make sure that this radio button is set to disallow, and we will restrict the prefix for international calling. That's it. I already restricted international calling to this class of service. But let's say that this company has business with Argentina. So I want to be able to make the employees call destinations in Argentina. So I want to create an exception to this international calling restriction and allow calls to Argentina. So I will add an outside restriction, but in this case I will take the allow option, and I will define the prefix for international calling and the country code for Argentina. So that will be my exception to the rule. So this is an example of how do we set restrictions and how do we set exceptions to the restrictions. With that, we learned how to configure inbound and outbound calling on informed voice. And I thank you, and I see you on the next video.